Paul Blume is covering the big story of Vance Boelter, the man accused of killing Melissa Hortman and her husband and shooting at Senator John Hoffman and his wife, changing his plea from not guilty to guilty. And Paul is right now there in a recess. He joins us with what he has found out so far in this hearing in federal court. Paul, bring us up to speed. Good morning.
Yeah, good morning to you. Thanks for having me. I'm just out of the courtroom. The hearing wrapped up, ran about an hour long. We made our way downstairs to the United States Attorney's Office, where we will be hearing shortly from U.S. Attorney Mark Rosen, as well as law enforcement. I said Drew Evans, the head of the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension. Of course, you and Leah were talking about that 43-hour manhunt, the massive manhunt for Vance Boelter. But of course, as you guys have been discussing, have been tweeting on social media, so perhaps our viewers had followed along, Vance Boelter has pleaded guilty to all 6 federal counts he was facing. Judge John Thunheim accepted the guilty plea. Vance Boelter, as of this moment, is adjudicated guilty. He pleads guilty to those 6 counts. In exchange, he gets 2 life sentences plus a tacked on 40 years because of the gun violence nature of the crime. So 2 life sentences and then an additional 40 years. And with that agreement to avoid a trial, the United States government, and we certainly expect to hear more from Daniel Rosen on the decision not to seek the death penalty in this case.
We know that there were a lot of folks there in the proceedings. Paul, tell us who was representing who, and I imagine it was packed.
Yeah, the courtroom was absolutely packed. In fact, they had an overflow courtroom next door where you could follow along the proceedings in closed-circuit television. Of course, no cameras in U.S. District Court and the federal court system. So, you know, reporters, obviously the media, the Hortmans' children were in the courtroom. The Hoffmans, John and Yvette, of course, shot, 17 times combined, miraculously surviving. They were first row gallery. Their civil attorney was next to them, but then they had the next 2 seats over. So standing 30 feet away from the man who tried to kill them, right, maim them, critically injured them, nearly killed them, and as he allocuted. And I will say that perhaps the most intense moment, what happens during a guilty plea is the defense attorney will rattle off a bunch of questions for the defendant, in this case Vance Boelter. So his public defender was kind of rattling off the questions that he has to allocute to admit yes, yes, yes. And for the first time, we heard some more details about what happened at the Hortman house, the horror of that moment, of the interaction between Mark Hortman, of course, the Speaker Emeritus' late husband, at the door. You know, there's this, he's in this police outfit, the lights are flashing out of his vehicle, and then, there's an exchange that he's got to come in. There's been reports of gunfire, and he says, who else is home? And then he's just my wife, who Melissa would emerge, and the shooting would unfold. Boelter admitted that in the moment he said he was with Maple Grove Police and made up a badge number, and he described really basically stalking, attacking, going after Melissa Hortman. A horrific accounting of eventually, walking right up to her, putting the gun to her head and shooting and killing the former DFL lawmaker. And there was just a gasp. There were tears in the courtroom. No one, was really necessarily expecting sort of the play-by-play of exactly what happened. But to allocute, to have a guilty plea accepted, he had to go through those details, and that had not surfaced in reports. And to hear him just so calmly and then almost coldly in that courtroom say it was intense.
I would only imagine, and we were following along your Twitter remarks as well, and just reading it was sobering enough and spine-chilling. I can only imagine what it was like to be in the courtroom, especially the family members there. How about Senator Hoffman and his family? Could you see very much of how they were reacting to all this? Was it very much akin to what the family of the Hortmans was going through?
Yeah, I didn't. I had a good view of John. John was really, the senator was really kind of up in his seat, and the way I was positioned in the media side, he was opposite me, and I could see he was, he was intense. He was laser focused, and Boelter had to allocute to what happened at their doorway and what he allegedly said. And I kind of was wondering what was going through the Hoffman's head. Like, did it really happen that way? I was kind of curious. I should read. I did just get a statement from the Hoffman family. I mean, they have spoken before, but after wrapping up that hearing, I do have a new statement from them. I'll just read it, excuse me, as I kind of look down at my phone to read. There is no justice for Mark and Melissa Hortman, and there is not justice when our family and our state will never truly heal. While the legal process may provide accountability, true healing requires something more from all of us. The choice we've made is to go forward with public service and being present for our community. The opportunity for justice is for Minnesotans and Americans to serve, is to treat people with respect, to stop dehumanizing each other, and to stop dividing our country with hate and rhetoric. I will point out Boelter just answered questions very efficiently, very coldly, very respectfully. He will be sentenced at a later date. Again, 2 life sentences plus 40 years tacked onto that. It is sort of a done deal, but we do have to get to a formal sentencing. Senior Judge John Thunheim did not schedule a sentencing. He talked about wanting to get it done by the end of July, so you're only talking in the next 6 weeks. But at that point, he will have the opportunity to speak. You think about all the ramblings, the writings, what was his motivation? We haven't heard that. Will he use that as a platform to speak out? We don't know. Obviously, probably in the next few weeks, we will certainly see and hear that. And then also the victims at that point will be able to get up in court. John and Yvette Hoffman did not. John and Yvette Hoffman did not. And of course, the Hoffman children, the grown adult children of Mark and Melissa did not speak today. So we will see if they choose to speak in victim impact statements at a later date.
And Paul, we understand the Boelter family was also in attendance. Did Vance Boelter make eye contact with his family, or did he make eye contact with the other parties involved with this horrific incident?
Yeah, I have to be honest. Now, I don't know the Boelter family by recognition. There were seats and a bench reserved for them. I did put that out on Twitter. I will say that bench in front of me did seem to fill up with interns, court staff, and the like. There were 2 people I would say I didn't quite recognize on the end, so I'm not sure if there was a relation there. As I watched Boelter, he was shackled at the ankles. He had chains on his ankles, but he was not handcuffed. He was wearing orange jailhouse jumpsuit. Walked in, confidently, had an air, a little bit of a presence about him, confident, haircut, looks like he's lost a fair amount of weight from the photo we saw of him being captured in the farm fields down in the muck. Remember, he's crawling around, I think back to the drones and then the trail cameras visualizing him just, within, a half mile or so of his own home and being captured. So he looked a little bit different than the photos I had seen. I hadn't seen him in court since his very first court appearance last year. You may remember he was complaining at that point about jailhouse conditions at the Sherburne County Jail, that he couldn't sleep, and I guess he was looking for some comfort and respect from the court. But he has remained at that jail throughout, and today just an enormous moment in this case on the criminal side, with him pleading guilty to 6 counts. He gets the 2 life sentences, the 40 or 20 years tacked onto that. And then what we're waiting for, I haven't heard back, but I know there are state charges. First, we murder charges in state court just a block away, Hennepin County. The Hennepin County Attorney's Office made clear to me last night that this is not a global plea agreement. The state charges remain. So what happens to that case? I'll be curious just to hear. It is a formality. Obviously, Boelter is going away for life times 2, but I will be curious just to follow along the legalities. And could we have a trial in state court? Is that where he wants to fight that, or have speak out on it and make a point? I just don't know. We do expect to hear from that office later today on how that case moves forward from here.
Right. And we just know his motivation in this plea was to avoid the death penalty.
And very, very good point. Yeah, so death, just reiterate that over and over. The death penalty was taken off. It's not exactly clear. It would appear from what we heard today that it was used as sort of, something that was being held over his head to get this plea agreement. Spares him a potential life death sentence. He pleads guilty to the 6 counts, but obviously he accepts the life sentence. But there were some legality questions about in federal court. Was the murder combined with the federal stalking statute? Was that enough to reach the threshold of a capital crime? There was mixed legal feelings, obviously, in New York City with Luigi Mangione and the attack on the United Healthcare executive on the streets of New York. That capital charge, very similar, stalking, murder. It eventually was kicked out as a capital offense, and there was uncertainty on what would happen here. Obviously, there are different circumstances, but similar enough where I think here you close the case. You don't need to go to trial. You don't spend years arguing about it. You don't have to subject these family members who are in that court to a trial, the resources that it would take from this government to prosecute. That all goes away now. We have this guilty plea, and now we just head to sentencing.
Right. All right. Paul, thanks, as per usual, for your reporting, and we appreciate your time with us today. That's Paul Blume there.